Welcome everyone. In today's video, we're going to be making 6 yummy recipes.
Welcome to Life on Lindy. My name is Stacy. I'm so glad to have you here. If you haven't subscribed, consider it. I'm still trying to get to my first 1,000 subscribers. And if you have already subscribed, thank you so much for helping me get there. Let's make some soup. Today we're going to be making vegetable soup. I don't think I make it the same way anytime. It's probably been different every time I've made it. I use what I have. I save all of our beef, whether it be steak or beef tips and gravy or roast beef, Mississippi pot roast, whatever it is that we have that's beef. I put it in a big bowl or a bag in the freezer and I freeze it. And when I get ready to make my soup, I drag it all out. And that's what we're gonna do today. And then I'm thinking about making some sugar-free banana muffins, and I know I'm gonna make some cornbread. So let's get to it.
We're starting off with this huge pot. I think it's about 9 quarts. I mean, this thing is huge. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw in all of my leftovers. I have some steak, I have some beef tips and gravy. You get it. I just have a lot of beef, and I also put in about 1 pound of raw soup meat. Some of the meat is still slightly frozen, but by the time the raw meat cooks up, it'll all be just fine. I'm filling the pot about half full with water, enough to cover all the meat, just to ensure that the raw meat gets cooked. For this part, I'm leaving the burner on high. While the meat is cooking, I'm going to start dicing 2 onions. I like a lot of onions in my soup. Sometimes I even add more. You can add what you like. Now I'm adding the onions, and I'm going to add 1 packet of Lipton beefy onion soup mix. Sometimes I add 2, but I had a lot of that mix in some of the leftovers that I dumped in. I also add the French onion soup sometimes. You can add whatever you like. I stir it quite often, and I always check the level of the water. I don't want anything to stick, and it takes constant attention. The next thing I'm going to add is a whole head of cabbage. I had previously chopped the cabbage up into about 1-inch squares, and I just threw them in a freezer bag, and they've been in the freezer for a couple of weeks. I always include the stalk when I'm chopping cabbage. There's a lot of flavor in the stalk when you're making soup. I'm going to be using 6 medium-sized potatoes. They have thin skin, so I'm not going to peel them, and I'm just going to chop them with the skins on. I'm waiting for the cabbage to cook down a little bit before I add the potatoes, so I'm adding water and stirring constantly, making sure nothing is going to stick. This is a recipe that I rarely walk away from for more than a couple minutes. It's a constant eyes-on thing. The cabbage is cooked down now and it's wilted, and so I'm going to reduce the heat to medium. I'm adding in some Lowry's seasoned salt, some powdered garlic, and some ground black pepper. Add to taste. You'll have to keep tasting this all the way through until you're finished with the soup. The cabbage is almost cooked all the way down to where I want it to be, and I'm getting ready to add the potatoes. And the potatoes soak up a lot of water, so I'm putting 4 cups of water in, and then I'm going to add in the potatoes, and I'm going to stir it well, and I'm going to keep a close eye on it because the potatoes will cook fast, and I don't want anything to stick. The potatoes will also absorb a lot of the seasonings, so I'll probably have to season it again. I'll taste it often. The potatoes have been boiling for a few minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and add 1 cup of elbow macaroni, and I'm going to keep stirring it. Adding in the pasta, I know it's going to require some more seasonings, so I'm adding in some more seasoned salt, some powdered garlic, and a little bit more pepper. And I'm going to taste it. So far I've added in the veggies that I like. I'm a picky eater and I don't like a huge variety of vegetables. So if you like other things like squash or zucchini or anything, you can add that in there. I know a lot of people like all those things I just mentioned, and they like okra and other things in their soup. These are just the things that I like. And now that the pasta and the potatoes are where I want them to be, I'm going to add in about a 2/3 full bag of frozen vegetables. Since these vegetables are frozen, it's going to take a little while for the soup to come back up to boil. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to add in 1 can of rinsed pinto beans, and then I eventually add in 1 can of rinsed butter beans. My soup pot is almost full to capacity, but I still want to add in some tomatoes and some tomato juice. So right now I'm going to add in 1 large can. It's a 28-ounce can of red gold diced tomatoes. If my pot hadn't been so full already, I probably would have added 2 cans of tomatoes. I like a lot of tomatoes in my soup. Now I'm going to add in half the jug of the vegetable juice. It's the same thing as V8. I usually end up adding more of the juice either to my bowl or to the pot the next day because these vegetables soak up a lot of the juices. I'm adding in a can of large butter beans. I just think the soup needs some more beans in it. It looks like this is all that this pot is going to be able to hold. I have a great big giant canning pot, and if I had that out, I would probably still be adding to it because that's how making soup goes. The bigger the pot, the more you want to add to it because everything in it is good. What we don't eat or share in a couple of days, I'll freeze and we'll have it another time. At this point, I put the lid on it and I let it simmer for about 30 minutes and then it's ready to serve. And this is what it looks like when it's through simmering. Now I'm going to make a pan of cornbread. My favorite is this Jiffy corn muffin mix, and I just fix it according to what the label says for corn muffins, only I add 1 extra egg. We had this for dinner a couple of nights, and Dean took it for lunch a couple of days as well. And here's the finished product, and it was really good. And now I'm going to make some oatmeal banana sugar-free muffins. They're not the best muffins you'll ever have, but for sugar-free, they are good. And these are all the ingredients that I used. And I'll leave the recipe. You'll be able to see that. I just followed the recipe. It was easy to mix up. Threw them in the pan. And they were pretty good for sugar-free. I think if I did it again, I might add some sugar-free chocolate chips to it. I used Splenda in mine. It was either Splenda or Great Value's version of Splenda. I'm still experimenting with trying to cook sugar-free. If any of you guys know what the best sugar substitute is, especially for cooking, please let me know. They did turn out looking pretty good. Tonight's dinner, by request from Dean, is chili. I'm starting off with a big pan, 1 pound of ground chicken and 1 pound of ground beef, 2 packages of chili seasoning. I mix and match mine. It doesn't really matter what kind you use. 1 yellow onion that I diced up, and I use just enough vegetable juice to make it soupy as I want it to be. And I used 1 large can of diced tomatoes or 2 regular cans, and I used 1 large can of chili beans or 2 regular cans. I put the meat and the onions in the pan and I browned it up, and once it was browned up, I drained it. After it was fully drained, I put it back in the pan and I set it back on the burner and I turned it on medium temperature. At this point, I add the seasoning packets one at a time and I add a cup of water to each packet, making sure to get each one thoroughly mixed in. Once they're both thoroughly mixed in and have the adequate amount of water, which totally, I guess I used 2 cups, and I let it simmer for a couple of minutes on medium. I don't follow the recipe directions on the back of the packets. The goal here is to make sure that your spices are cooked and doing their job. At this point, I add in the whole can of beans. I give it a good stir and then I add in the whole can of diced tomatoes. Now it's time to add in the juice. I had an already open jug of juice in the refrigerator, so I just used the rest of it and put the new one back in the cabinet. The next day, it's always thicker than it is the first day, so I usually add more juice to it then. Now I'm just going to put the lid on it and let it simmer for about 20 minutes, and then it's done. Dean likes to add spaghetti noodles to his, so I did cook a little of those for him, but I served mine with a peanut butter sandwich and a glass of milk, and it was oh so good. Tonight's dinner is one of the most simple things that you could ever make, and it's so tasty, and that's pulled pork barbecue sandwiches. I start with this whole pork loin, and it's actually got 2 pieces in it. I let it thaw overnight in the refrigerator, and then I cut it in half, and that gave me 4 pieces. The total weight is about 2¼ pounds. All you need is the pork loin, a crock pot, and a jar of barbecue sauce of your choice. I don't put any salt or pepper on anything that we barbecue. We don't like a lot of salt, and the barbecue to us has a pretty good kick to it, so I don't add any pepper to it either. But if you're not going to put any barbecue sauce on it, I would definitely season it up. I put all 4 pieces of meat into the crock pot and I cooked it on high for about 5 hours with 1 cup of water. And after it was cooked thoroughly, I drained all the water off of it and I put it back into the crock pot and I put it on serve. I shredded it, and then I added the whole container of barbecue sauce. I stirred it up really well and I left it on serve until we were ready to eat, and that was about an hour. And then we just put it on toasted buns and ate it with some chips. And that was just a simple dinner, and we ate it until it was gone. It's always a hit around here. If you make this simple recipe, let me know how you like it. I didn't get a picture of it plated, but it was really good. Tonight's menu is creamy pork chops, green beans with potatoes and onions, and fettuccine parmesan. I'll be adding 4 thick boneless pork chops. We'll be using my favorite little covered casserole dish again. I sprayed the bottom with some Pam cooking oil. They have a little bit of fat on them, so I'm not going to be adding any water or any liquid or anything to cook them. The juices will cook out of the meat. I am going to be seasoning them with some Lowry seasoned salt, some granulated garlic, and black pepper. I had the oven preheated to 350, and then I remembered it needed to be at 400. So I went ahead and put the pork chops in the oven, and I just left them on 350 until the heat rose to 400, and I didn't worry about it too much. After about 45 minutes, I checked on the progress, and I flipped them over and I put them back in for about 15 more minutes. And at that point, they were really almost done. I mean, you could call them done. They're definitely cooked thoroughly, but the longer you leave them in there in those juices, the more tender they get. It also depends on how thick they are. Mine were pretty thick. At this point, they've been cooking in those juices for about an hour. So I'm going to take a whole can of cream of chicken soup and I'm going to put it just directly on top of the pork chops in all of the juices, and I'm just going to spread that out. After I do that, I'm going to add a half of a cup of milk, and I'm going to give it a stir, and I'm going to cover it back up, and I'm going to put it back in for 30 minutes. I did add a little bit more black pepper. That's all I added because that weakly diluted cream of chicken soup has a lot of sodium and salt and spices in it already. It looked like I dumped half of the container of pepper in there, but it wasn't too peppery. This is the finished product, and it was really good. This is everything I'll be using for my green beans. I have a large can of green beans, or gribbies, as we call them around here, because that's what my boys called them when they were really little. I'll be chopping up half of an onion and 2 medium-sized potatoes. I'll dice those. Again, they're yellow potatoes with thin skins, and I'm going to be leaving the skins on. I'll be using my usual go-to spices, which are Lowry's seasoned salt, pepper, and granulated garlic. Seasoned to taste. I left the juices in the can of green beans. I added enough water to cover everything and to allow the potatoes and the onions to boil and cook down. These are called Knorr pasticides. I used the Parmesan fettuccine. I mostly followed the directions on the package, but I did throw in the noodles and the milk and the water at the same time, and you really weren't supposed to do that, but it didn't make a bit of difference. It still turned out great. I used 2 packages because on the package it says each packet is 1 serving, and each packet had at least 2.5 servings in it, so I had more than enough. The next time I probably won't make 2 packets at one time. But we really did like them. It was the first time that we'd made these, and we liked them a lot. I think it would be really good if you put some peas and carrots and some tuna and just had like a tuna noodle. I think that would be really good. And this is what the dinner looks like. We all liked it. I'm definitely going to do it again. We do this a lot, actually, but I haven't ever done it with the fettuccine. I also make this dish with chicken, and it's really good as well. If you make this, let me know how you liked it. Tonight's dinner is going to be barbecued rib, mashed potatoes, and frozen corn. I'll be using my favorite covered dish. You see it a lot when I'm cooking anything that goes in the oven. I'm going to spray the bottom of it, and then I'm going to add a layer of barbecue sauce, and then I'll add 5 thick pork ribs to the bottom. I'm getting a really good layer of the sauce on the bottom, and then we're going to add the ribs. I love the flavor and the texture of thick, ooey gooey cooked barbecue sauce, and that's why I put it on the bottom before it even starts to cook. You'll notice that I don't put any seasonings on this, and that's because I think the sauce has plenty enough seasonings and spices and flavor in it on its own. Now I'll add a really good layer of sauce on the top, and then we'll put the lid on it and pop it in the oven at 400 degrees. It took about 2 hours for these ribs to cook. The time always depends on how thick your meat is. After about an hour and a half, I took the lid off and checked them. I put some more barbecue sauce on top of them, and I let them cook for 30 more minutes uncovered to thicken up all of the sauce. Here's how they turned out. Next, I'm going to make some mashed potatoes. I just used some yellow potatoes, actually, with thin skinned. I left the skins on them, diced them up, boiled them, mashed them in the pan. I didn't use an electric mixer. I just used the silicone whisk, put some milk, some salt and pepper, and butter to taste. I also added about a half a cup of instant potato flakes to give it texture. I like it that way. Now we're going to do the frozen corn. I always like to get bird's eye corn if possible. If I can't get bird's eye, I would almost just as soon have canned corn. I put 3 cups of frozen corn into a microwave safe bowl, and then I put about a half of a stick of butter, and I put it in the microwave for 3-minute increments. It takes about 9 minutes, and I salt and pepper to taste. I probably could have only done 2 cups of the frozen corn, but I was making sure we had leftovers for Dean to take for lunch for the rest of the week. Now we're just going to heat up a can of my favorite peas. They're the LaSure tiny peas. They're the only ones I really like. We're just going to let them boil. I'm going to put some salt and pepper and some butter, and when they start to boil down and get a little thick, we're done. And this was dinner for tonight. Tonight's dinner is baked pasta shells. These are the ingredients. I have 1 pound of ground beef, a half a pound of ground chicken, a large jar of Prego with meat sauce, some Parmesan cheese, some mozzarella cheese, and some shell pasta. I'll also be adding in a half a cup of pre-cooked breakfast sausage. I already had that on hand, and so I decided to add it in. I'll also be adding in 1 medium yellow onion, chopped in fairly big or medium-sized pieces. The first thing I do is get my pot of water on to boil for the pasta noodles, and then I start putting all the meats into the skillet and get them all browned up. When the meat is almost all the way cooked, I add in the half a cup of sausage that I already had pre-cooked. While the meat is continuing to cook and brown and I'm waiting on the water to boil, I quickly chop up my onion. Then I add it to the browning meat. I continue to brown the meats and the onions until the onions are soft and a little bit caramelized. I was wondering why my water was taking so long to boil. I forgot to turn it on. Now that the meats and the onions are fully browned and cooked all the way through, I'm going to take them off the heat and drain them. After the meat is browned and drained, I bring it back to the stove and I put it on a different burner because I need the bigger burner to get my water boiling. Now that the meat has been returned to the stove, I put it on the back burner so I can have some more room in the front of the stove, and I add half of the jar of spaghetti sauce to the pan. I make sure that the sauce mixture is stirred up really well, and then I put it on low and cover it with the lid and let it simmer. I keep a close eye on both of the pans, and I make sure that I keep them stirred really well because I don't want anything to scorch to the bottom of the pans. Now that the pasta is thoroughly cooked, I'm going to drain it, and then I'm going to return it back to the pan that it was boiling in. I'll let this burner cool off before I put the pasta back into the pan because on an electric stove, the burner stays hot for a little bit even after you turn it off. Now that the pasta is fully cooked, I add in the sauce mixture and I give it a really good stir to get it all mixed up. And then I add in about a whole bag of shredded cheese. You can use any kind you like. Sometimes I use just Italian blends or mozzarella or Romano. This time I used 2 or 3 different packages that I had in the refrigerator. Some of them are taco cheese, some are mozzarella, just whatever I had that I just wanted to use up. And I mixed all of that in with the sauce and the pasta mixture, and then I put all of that onto a greased casserole dish. I probably used about 2 cups of shredded cheese in the mixture and then another 2 cups on top of it. I also put some grated Parmesan cheese on top of it before I put it into the oven. I cover the whole pan with aluminum foil and I put it into a 425-degree oven. I let it cook for about 30 or 35 minutes in the oven covered, and then I uncover it and I cook it for another additional 15 or 20 minutes. Once the cheese on top is golden brown and bubbly, I take it out and I set it on top of the stove so it can cool down for a little bit so it'll be easier to dish out. We paired it with some Texas toast, homemade Olive Garden salad, and this is what it looked like. Don't forget to subscribe. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Life on Lindy with Stacy. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and leaving an emoji or a comment, and I'll get back to you. It helps my channel so much to have some interaction, and I'm so grateful for everyone that stuck around to watch. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.